Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like fortitude, future, freaks, and fallibility.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives and look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today we're going to talk about fertility, the joys, challenges, timing, frustrations, and the industry of making babies.
As an almost 40-year-old mom of two kids under 4, this is a topic very close to my heart. Joanne,
I bet. And I was born to a 40-year-old mother, which in the early 50s was highly unusual. So,
oh wow,
she was too fertile, I think. I don't think I was planned, but I digress.
Well, I'm curious. Would you be willing to tell me a little bit about what your journey to motherhood was like?
Absolutely. I am incredibly blessed. We were incredibly blessed. I never got pregnant when I didn't want to get pregnant. And I'm not going to tell you how many times that could have happened. It could have happened, let's just say. And as soon as we started trying, we conceived. And we actually knew the moment when it happened. It was a crazy, crazy thing. It was like this I know, one should not expect this to happen. And it didn't happen the second time, but it was like angels singing, la, la, this whole thing. And it was like we looked at each other like, what the hell just happened? And in fact, What happened was the beginning of Danny Green. Second time, with our second son, we weren't yet trying. We were going to start trying in another month or two. And we had planned a trip to Hawaii with friends who also had a little boy. And I had it all timed so that, I would have my period and then we'd go on this wonderful trip to Hawaii. And it never came. And there we were in Hawaii and everybody's having cocktails. And I'm going, no, I don't think I should. I just don't think I should. I think I could be pregnant. And my husband said, no, you couldn't possibly be pregnant because, the angels didn't sing or whatever it was. But I was. And that's it. I was only pregnant twice. I had 2 really healthy babies, super easy and normal pregnancies, normal deliveries. And, I'm grateful to this day.
Wow.
And you,
that's
my
great.
friend?
So, sort of similar. I was, I think, a little bit older. I got married when I was 34, and I should say I'm very much a product of 90s sex ed, the approach, which was not exactly abstinence, but it was the height of not the height, but the AIDS epidemic was definitely going on. And I grew up, not even because of my parents, but because of like my 7th grade sex ed classes, believing that if I, ever had unprotected sex, I would immediately become pregnant and or die. So my dating and my early sexual days, there was never, I never had unprotected sex. I didn't have unprotected sex until I was married and sort of in the window of being okay with getting pregnant. So we got pregnant pretty soon without really the intention. In fact, when I found out I was pregnant, we were kind of like not trying, is the way I would put it. I was surprised to discover I was pregnant. I had never taken a pregnancy test before, and we had been traveling throughout the Midwest, and we ended up in Syracuse. And we thought it would be really fun to take a train. We had been in Milwaukee and Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin. And we thought that it would be really fun and romantic to take a train from Milwaukee to Chicago and then to Syracuse, New York, where we were visiting friends. And I was absolutely miserable. I was nauseous and exhausted. I had no idea why. And then I flew home from New York a few days before Evan did because he wanted to stay for a few days and record music with his friend Joe, who we were visiting. And I got home and I realized my period was like 10 days late, which it never was. And I said, I'm just going to take a pregnancy test so I can stop thinking about this. And I had to actually go buy one because I didn't have any. And lo and behold, I was pregnant. But here's the kicker. Evan wasn't coming home for like 36 more hours. And the idea of calling him on the phone and telling him seemed like I wanted to tell him in person. But so I had to sit on this news because I couldn't tell, like I wanted to tell my mom, but I couldn't tell my mom before I told Evan. So I just had to be like alone with this information for a day and a half. But then he came home and I told him and it was very exciting. And then the second time we actually had kind of a hard time getting pregnant. With Sasha, I think we tried for about 8 months. And after I was nursing for most of that time. And so eventually I went to go see my doctor and she said, stop nursing and then keep trying. And if you don't get pregnant, then we'll get you set up we'll do some testing to see if we need to look into some assistance. And I think within 3 or 4 months of quitting nursing, I did get pregnant. So yeah, I think it felt, even just those 8 months, which I have learned does not technically count as infertility. That doesn't start until it's been a year of trying. But once I really wanted a baby and I wasn't getting pregnant, it started to be pretty devastating. So
it becomes devastating in so many different ways. First of all, I want to start by saying we are lucky and we are not typical either, because the statistics, and especially at your age, you were 39 years old, right? When Sasha was born?
I was almost 39. I was 38.
But over yeah, 35 when our fertility as women is said to drop significantly. So
yeah, we're going to get into that.
We're going to get into all of that. Tell me what some of the things were that you were feeling, say, for instance, in month 6, 7, and 8, when you had been trying, when you had been waiting each month for good news, and then you didn't get the news you were hoping for.
Oh, I mean, it was like the thing too was like every period, it was like adding insult to injury, right? Because every month I would bleed, and the worst was if my period was like a couple of days late. If it happened to be 2 or 3 days late for some reason, I would start to get my hopes up. And I would try not to take it'd be too early to take a pregnancy test, but I would still have to wait. And then pretty much every time my period would come. And it was like, not only am I not pregnant, but now I've got to deal with bleeding and cramps for the next 3 to 5 days.
Did you feel like a failure?
Blessed. I felt like there was something wrong with my body. And I felt like a failure because I didn't get going on this earlier. I wasn't ready when I was younger. I wasn't ready to get married until I met Evan, and then we weren't ready to get married until we were the ages that we were when we got married, and I wasn't ready to have a baby until I was 35 and I got pregnant with Anna. But all of that stuff had just sort of fallen into place, and I really didn't worry about it. I mean, I was living in San Francisco before, and I was average to young for a mom at 35 in San Francisco. But yeah, once I really wanted a baby, and this is one thing I have heard is just true no matter what age you are, no matter what's going on with your body. When you really want a baby and you're not getting pregnant, it's really devastating. And there is so much focus on women's fertility and very little focus, like in the media, on men and their fertility. And so I just assumed all the blame and all the fault, and really, even though my brain knew that I wasn't doing anything wrong, it was really hard to manually override that. I just felt like I was like researching constantly and taking all these supplements. And
how did it impact sex? You think of sex in a very different way when there's a particular outcome.
Right. And there, I mean, it was not the most romantic and sweet sex that we had ever had. And there were days when I had read something about how trying twice a day was a good idea, and it was exhausting, and it was like it really took the fun out of it. And I remember when I finally got pregnant with Sasha, in addition to being so relieved to be pregnant and so joyful and happy and hopeful, I was also really relieved for sex to get to stop being such a dramatic thing. And that was until I was 20 weeks pregnant, and it turned out that I had a uterine polyp, which was making me bleed, and then I had to be on pelvic rest for the remaining 20 weeks of my pregnancy. So that was a whole other fun thing. But at that point, I didn't care because I was so happy to be pregnant. But it was such a stressful time, and it really did feel like everything was resting on me, and it was so much pressure.
One of the other things about it that's so crazy is that for many women, we spent years trying to avoid getting pregnant and thinking that any little slip up would result in a pregnancy. And in fact, then you stop using birth control, nothing happens, and you think, what the heck,
It's like a cruel cosmic joke. It feels, yes,
Not
we've gone
a joke,
to so much trouble. Yeah. So I did a lot of research about fertility and infertility. And the first thing, and this was actually something that was recommended to me when I was trying to get pregnant with Sasha and struggling, and brought a lot of comfort to me. And so the first thing I want to say is that if you're trying to get pregnant, if you think you might want to get pregnant in the next few years, or if you're worried about whether your age might impact your chances, the first thing you got to do is watch. There's this great show called Adam Ruins Everything that's hosted by this fantastic. He's a comedian, but he's like so much more than a comedian. He's also a researcher, and he does great TikTok videos. This guy named Adam Conover, and he has a show called Adam Ruins Everything, where he sort of dismantles commonly held untruths, like things we've always believed to be true that oftentimes are not true. And he's got an episode on fertility, and it is fantastic. It is so the best thing it is it's deeply comforting, because and what it centers on is there's this belief that at age 35 something happens, like a woman's fertility just immediately drops off a cliff, and that the thing that is said is that a woman's fertility is chopped in half by the time she turns 35, and that is not only not true, but it's based on, and I just thought this was so crazy, it's based on very old research that was a study that was done on French farmers in the 1600s, which there were a lot of reasons that women weren't procreating in the 1600s after the age of 35, often because they didn't have access to modern day medical assistance, not to mention fertility assistance, but also because their husbands were going to war and dying, or there were diseases, or they started having children much younger and they were just done. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why that information is no longer applicable, but it's been this standard health thing, it's a little bit like our conversation about the BMI. Even though we know that it's not really relevant, doctors hold on to this information. Now, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily simple to get pregnant after the age of 35, but it's not nearly as complicated as we thought. And here are the concrete. Here's the concrete information. So, an average 27-year-old healthy woman has about an 86% chance of getting pregnant within a year. That same woman at age 37 has an 82% chance.
That is very encouraging.
Later, right? It's very, I mean, and fertility issues happen at all ages. And we do see them as we get older, but it's not this 50% drop off. So that is very encouraging. And fertility doesn't really start to get affected until you're in your 40s. And even then, while miscarriages become more common, so in women under 35, it's around 20%. Or sorry, when women 35 to 40, it's around 20%. And I believe in women under 35, it's like 15 to 20%. In women over 40, it is 40% chance. But we've also heard the statistic quoted many times that the chances of birth defects double when you turn 40. But that's technically true, but get this. It jumps from 0.5% to 1%. So it's technically a double. But, I mean, I think I thought the odds of a birth defect were higher than that to begin with. So I thought that was really interesting. So the overall picture is, especially in a lot of bigger cities and in general across the country, women are tending to have their first pregnancy later in life than they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I found that really encouraging. The episode is super entertaining and funny and, just like I said before, just deeply comforting.
And I assume we link to it in the show notes.
Oh, we will absolutely link to it. It'll be in the show notes. And in fact, one thing that was really great about researching this episode is that Adam Ruins Everything has a website and does a big favor of including all of their sources. So I did my own research with my own sources, but I pulled very much from their sources as well. They actually go through, and he does this with all the shows. It's so great. I cannot recommend the show enough. Beat by beat, every quote, there is a clickable link. They link to the source of that information. So they're not just spouting random stuff. They have studies and statistics they refer to. So it's really great.
I had a wonderful conversation yesterday with a mutual friend of ours who is now living in Florida, Sylvia Oppenheim, and she has 2 healthy children. And many people don't know that prior to having these 2 healthy children, she and her husband dealt with a major fertility issue. And part of what she was telling me was that, fertility really defines us in so many ways in this culture. If you are fertile and you, like me, have a baby when you want to have a baby and it's easy, then you just move right along. But when it's an issue, it becomes this enormous cloud around you. First of all, it isolates you. People judge you. People are constantly asking you questions that are deeply personal. No one would ever walk up to someone and say, "So, how often do you have sex with your husband?" But when you have been married for a year or 2, people think it's fair game to be able to say, "So, are you trying to have a kid? How are you trying to have a kid?" Just all of this stuff.
Isn't that
things
such a crazy thing? Oh, can I just say real quick? Isn't that such a crazy thing about even if you don't have fertility issues, there are 2 points in a woman's life that I've always thought were so freaking wild, where the first couple of years of marriage, and then if you are able to get pregnant, the questions that are asked by strangers or casual acquaintances about the sex that you're having, about what your body's doing, about your sexual history, never mind we've talked about this before, but like the strangers that want to touch your belly, it's just the weird, invasive ownership that other people feel about women in that particular phase of life has never ceased to disgust and amaze me.
So the advice is respect people's privacy, support people who share with you what they're going through, do not suggest solutions, and for the most part, if people aren't sharing, just shut up. Just don't ask questions, right? Another thing Sylvia said was that the trauma of being infertile doesn't go away. She has 2 healthy children. She is still traumatized by this. She's now working with an organization that we will also link to in the show notes called the Jewish Fertility Foundation. It began in Atlanta. It's now cropping up in a number of other cities. It isn't, if it isn't in a city near you, it will be soon because they're growing and becoming national. And she said that while 1 in 8 couples in the general population experiences infertility, 1 in 6 couples in the Jewish community does, which I thought was quite fascinating. And one of the things, obviously, couples experiencing infertility need the help of fertility specialists, and they need to know what their options are. And you can go into telling us what some of those are. And it's like, first you tried this, and if that doesn't work, then you tried this, and then you can try this, and eventually you can try IVF or surrogacy or these other things. But what about the psychological help and the social emotional help that couples need? They are still having to experience their friends becoming pregnant, their friends' children having birthday parties where they are the only couple showing up without a child. I mean, there's all this other pressure. And as you say, women so often feeling like it's clearly their bodies that are the source of the problem, when in many cases it has to do with the man's sperm count or the motility of his sperm. And all of this requires testing and emotional support. So why don't you take us through what some of the steps are?
Sure. Well, one thing I just wanted to say in response of what you were saying about the emotional component of this is that for me, and I also think for so many of us, we're not really used to problems that we can't solve, right? And so certainly I very much relate to the idea of this being all encompassing. I did not think about anything else. I did not read books about anything else. I thought constantly about what, I tried to eat in a particular way that, whatever some website suggested would be support. Everything I did, I tried to address this problem. And because there are things that can be done, and we're going to get into that, but there is this feeling, even with that help and those extra steps, there is this feeling of no control. And it's very destabilizing. And I think in a couple, there were so many times where Evan and I would talk about this, and he couldn't fix it and I couldn't fix it. And all we could do was keep trying and wait. And so the emotional support component of this, I think, is really important.
I want to throw this one thing in that she said that I think is super helpful for those of us who might encounter infertile couples in our lives. The last thing in the world, she said, that you should ever tell an infertile person is to just relax.
Oh, God. You shouldn't tell anyone to just relax, but for sure that, yeah.
And the other thing is, when people lose a pregnancy, do not say, oh, it was just 8 weeks or whatever it was. Don't ever try to make it okay. Just listen and honor the grief. Period. Absolutely. A lost pregnancy is a lost pregnancy. That's exactly what it is. It was the promise of life and then no life. And that requires mourning.
Well, and unless you are the person who lost the pregnancy or the partner of the person who lost the pregnancy, you cannot, pardon the phrasing, but you cannot possibly conceive of what it is they're experiencing. And it's just as it's never anyone else's job to make sense of someone else's loss of a
Any loss.
living. Yes, exactly. It is. Yes, agreed. That's one of those things where all you should be is supportive. So in my research into the different treatments, and there are many, many different treatments for infertility, my personal experience was first my doctor suggested that I stop breastfeeding, and it turned out with nursing, which often is an issue when parents are trying for a second baby if they're still nursing a toddler, which I was. Apparently, there's a chemical issue, although many women think that pregnancy, or they think that nursing is birth control, and then they do get pregnant. But it can work as birth control, especially when you're exclusively breastfeeding. But it's not, like my doctor said, it's not reliable. So you should use other forms if you're not trying to get pregnant. However, the other issue is with breastfeeding, the tiny uterine contractions that the letdown of milk can cause can cause a tiny brand new pregnancy to be lost. So it was possible that was what was going on. We never really figured it out. So the first step is a visit to your doctor to find out what's going on. They'll probably just give you some basic pointers. And then in the event that you want to move forward, generally the main treatment for infertility is IVF, which is essentially the doctor combines the sperm and the egg and implants it into whoever is going to be carrying the baby. So, and that can be done with the mother's egg, or it can be done with a donor egg or donor sperm. So one thing that's interesting is that fertility treatments and different forms of support have become they're very expensive and often not covered by insurance. And they have become increasingly something that is offered as a part of a health benefits package by employers.
Especially high-tech companies, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Who are competing for talent, right?
Yes, and giving families the benefit of taking their time to grow their family, and knowing that they're not somehow limited by timing is really attractive. So, but this is where we get into some tricky stuff. So, well, let me say a little bit more. Fertility services, one thing that's great about them is that they can be a key to diversity. Because, yes, in a heterosexual couple, generally, if there aren't health issues, if there aren't fertility issues, the process of procreating is fairly straightforward. Again, pardon the phrasing. But from an equity and inclusion perspective, having fertility services available to LGBTQIA couples is really important. And there are some companies that support parents through IVF, sperm and egg donation, and even getting the process of adoption started, which I thought was really interesting. But here's the tricky thing. There's one service that is offered increasingly by a lot of businesses, and even for women whose employers do not offer this. It is becoming increasingly popular, but it's a complicated issue, and that is egg freezing. So it's been touted and is widely understood to be for women who aren't necessarily ready to start a family or to have a baby, and they want to know that they'll have the option of younger, healthier eggs down the road a little bit. So the thing is, and it's wildly expensive. So if you're paying out of pocket, it can cost upwards of $20,000. Now, it's increasingly covered partially by some good insurances and also by businesses. Here's the thing, though. It's got between two big issues. It's got between a 13 and 21% success rate, according to US and UK studies. And in many cases, the frozen eggs go unused because often a fresher egg, even if a younger egg is technically healthier, a fresher egg, one that a woman has at the time of conception, she has them all the time, but an egg that's ready at the time of conception, as opposed to one that needs to be thawed, often has an easier time resulting in a pregnancy. So it's a tricky thing. And I think that especially for women who aren't quite ready and who want to have an option, the idea of freezing your eggs sounds very appealing. It's just a little bit of a tricky and not always, it's not necessarily the 1-2 shot that we thought it would be. So, it's a growing industry, and sometimes can be a little bit predatory.
Do you have any stories of instances where it has been?
Not so much. I don't have any personal friends who have gone through the experience of it being predatory. I've had multiple friends freeze their eggs and then use fresher eggs. It's more that the marketing is predatory. The suggestion that if you don't do this, you won't be able to have a baby. So
it's human nature to want to increase your options and keep your options open for as long as possible. And knowing that possibility is out there, I would think for a woman in her mid-30s, it would be very tempting. And again, there's a lot of privilege involved if you're not working for a company that offers this as a benefit. You're talking about a lot of money to do it. So obviously this isn't available for everyone. But it's interesting that we also are living in a time when women are choosing to have children later and later. Where at one time it was really common for women to be having their kids in their 20s. Now that's moved into the 30s and in some cases up into the 40s.
Absolutely. And increasingly I know more and more, especially millennials, who are just choosing not to have kids. We're procreating as a generation much, much less. It's no longer just sort of assumed that you're going to have kids. So I think that's interesting too. And I think a lot of the reason that we're waiting until later, and I'd love to say what I think are some of the benefits of being an older parent. But I think a big reason is that, especially if you live in an expensive area like we do, you have to work for a long time before you can afford to have kids.
That has changed. The economics of parenthood has absolutely changed.
Definitely. I also think, I don't know what it's like to be a young mom, but when I think of myself at age 25, I for sure felt like I could barely adequately take care of myself, let alone children. I'm sure I would have figured it out, but I've had the benefit of getting older, I have more life perspective, lots of therapy, I kind of know who I am. And I really, when I think about my own parents raising at the age that they were when they were raising us, and I think about myself at that same age, it just seems impossible. It seems like now at age 39, almost 40.
Oh, we're going to do that one,
speaking
baby.
of F words. I think of my parents were 27 and 30 when I was born, and I just think of 27-year-olds as children. I'm wrong.
Well, some are and some
but
aren't,
it sure
right?
is how I think
Some
about
are
them.
and some aren't. And there are ways
that's
in which,
true.
we
That's true.
draw.
Yeah.
We draw from everything, and we draw upon our, hopefully, parents or other relatives, older siblings who are around. I know that a lot of my parenting techniques came from paying really close attention to what my sister was doing. She was 8 years older than me, and we lived fairly close to one another, and I took a lot of notes there. But interestingly enough, I was 28 and 31 when my two sons were born, and I am the product of someone who was 40 when I was born. So that's kind of against trend. Right? But I was also the third and not exactly planned. So why do you think, before we wrap up today's episode, why do you think millennials are waiting longer or deciding in many cases not to become parents consciously?
Well, I really think it's financial for a lot of them. I think that student loans are crippling, and the world is very, very expensive. Also, I will say, as a pandemic parent, this is not an easy timeline in which to be raising children. And I think I personally am trying really hard to feel hopeful about the future, but I think for a lot of people, they just don't feel hopeful. I also think that, for a lot of people in my generation, it's taken a little longer to launch. I dated plenty of guys in my 20s who were kind of still living with their parents, and then were taking their time. They worked jobs that weren't really real jobs, and were kind of easing their way into becoming launched. And I think that that's a really challenging perspective to come from when you're also taking care of a kid. So I think I think a lot of people in our generation are taking longer to get into the position to be ready.
Makes sense. I think some of the big takeaways from today's episode are, first of all, there is an industry out there, which is the good news and the bad news. The good news in that science has progressed to the point where there's a lot of help for couples who are experiencing infertility. The bad news is that it's an industry with a profit motive. So buyer beware and be careful to not fall prey to less scrupulous marketing techniques. The other thing that I heard loud and clear, and again, mostly from my conversation with Sylvia, was really how to be sensitive to and support couples in whatever stage of the journey they're in, and not just couples, but individuals. Increasingly, women are choosing to become single parents, and really just, I encourage everybody to leave judgment at the door, and if you can't help yourself and you feel the need to judge, keep it to yourself. Do not share your opinions, because it is not helpful.
Yeah.
It's a general rule in
life. It's a good general rule. Yeah. And I think also I just want to really underscore we get the message that there's this, we should be panicking and rushing to get pregnant as soon as possible because, our bodies are about to turn into dust. And that is not, in fact, the case. If you are, I watched that episode, I rewatched it many times throughout my pregnancy journey with Sasha. And even when it just felt, and I was fortunate not to require any sort of intervention, although they do talk a great deal about assistance in that episode. And it's really comforting. And I think that there's no reason to conclude immediately that your body's not going to do what you want it to do from the outset.
Thanks so much for listening today. She's Gabby Moskowitz, and I'm Joanne Green. Please follow us anywhere you get your podcasts. We are All the F Words. And follow us on social media.
We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at All the F Words Pod. And you should email us. We're at allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Bye.